The morning sun cast long shadows across Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood quietly by the tall windows of their private sitting room. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the official medical report that would change everything. The words on the paper seemed to blur together, but their meaning was crystal clear. The cancer had spread further than anyone had hoped. William had left early for an engagement with local veterans, his usual bright smile masking the worry that had been growing in his heart for weeks. Catherine had insisted he go, knowing how much these men meant to him, and how much he meant to them. She watched his car disappear through the palace gates, her heart heavy with the knowledge she would soon have to share. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Catherine's oncologist, had delivered the news with the gentle professionalism that had become familiar over the past months. The treatment options were becoming limited, and the timeline they had all hoped for was shortening with each passing day. Catherine had listened with the same grace she showed in public, asking thoughtful questions and taking careful notes, even as her world seemed to tilt on its axis. The palace staff moved quietly around her, sensing something had changed. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper who had worked for the family for over 20 years, brought tea without being asked. She had seen Catherine through many difficult moments, from the early days of morning sickness with Prince George to the challenging periods of intense public scrutiny. This felt different, though. There was a stillness about the princess that spoke of something far more serious than anything they had faced before. Catherine thought about their children as she sipped her tea. George, now 10, was showing such promise in his studies and had inherited his father's love for football. Charlotte, 8, was developing into a confident young girl with a mischievous sense of humor that could light up any room. And little Louis, just 5, still believed his parents could fix anything in the world. How would they explain to 3 young children that their mother was running out of time? The sound of William's return echoed through the corridors earlier than expected. Catherine heard his familiar footsteps, quick and purposeful, as he made his way to their private quarters. She had called him during his engagement, saying simply that they needed to talk when he got home. He had known immediately from her tone that something was wrong. William found her still by the window, the medical report now folded carefully on the side table. He didn't need to ask what the paper contained. The way Catherine stood, her shoulders set with quiet determination, told him everything. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and wrapped his arms around her, feeling her lean into his strength. They stood like that for several minutes, not speaking, just holding each other as the reality settled between them. William pressed his face into her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, trying to memorize this moment. Catherine felt the strong beat of his heart against her cheek and drew comfort from its steady rhythm. Finally, Catherine pulled back slightly to look into William's eyes. Those blue eyes that had first captured her attention all those years ago at university were now filled with unshed tears. She reached up to touch his face, her thumb tracing the line of worry that had appeared between his brows over the past few months. "How long?" William asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine took a deep breath before answering. "Dr. Mitchell thinks perhaps 6 months, maybe a bit more if we're fortunate." Her voice remained steady, but William could see the fear lurking behind her calm exterior. William felt his knees threaten to buckle, but he forced himself to remain strong. Catherine needed his strength now more than ever. They had always been a team, facing every challenge together, from the intense media attention in their early relationship to the pressures of royal life. This would be their greatest test. "We'll make every day count," William said firmly, taking her hands in his. "Every single day." Catherine smiled then, the first genuine smile she had managed since receiving the news. This was why she had fallen in love with him all those years ago. William had always been able to find hope even in the darkest moments. His optimism wasn't naive, it was born from a deep understanding that life was precious and should be lived fully, no matter the circumstances. They spent the rest of the morning making plans. Not the kind of plans they had been making for months about future royal engagements and family holidays. These were different plans, more immediate and infinitely more precious. They talked about telling the children, about how to manage Catherine's remaining public duties, and about the time they wanted to spend together as a family. William cancelled his afternoon appointments, something he rarely did unless it was an emergency. Today qualified as an emergency, though not one that would make the evening news. This was a private emergency, a family crisis that would be handled with the dignity and discretion that had always characterized their approach to difficult times. As they talked, Catherine found herself studying William's face with new intensity. She wanted to remember every detail, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the way he ran his fingers through his hair when he was thinking deeply. These features that she had loved for so many years were now becoming even more precious. William noticed her scrutiny and understood it completely. He was doing the same thing, cataloging the small details that made Catherine who she was. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the musical quality of her laugh, the graceful way she moved her hands when she spoke. He realized he had been taking these things for granted, assuming they would always be there. The afternoon passed quietly, with both of them lost in their own thoughts while remaining close to each other. They sat together on the sofa in their private sitting room, Catherine's head on William's shoulder, his arm wrapped protectively around her. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with words. Sometimes love was expressed best in quiet moments like these. As evening approached, they knew they would soon need to collect the children from their various activities. George had football practice, Charlotte was at a friend's house, and Louis was with his nanny in the palace gardens. Soon, their private world of two would expand to include 3 young voices full of energy and questions. Catherine felt a mixture of dread and anticipation about telling the children. They deserved to know what was happening, but finding the right words to explain such a complex and frightening situation would be one of the hardest things she had ever had to do. William squeezed her hand, seeming to sense her thoughts. "We'll tell them together," he said softly. "When you're ready." Catherine nodded, grateful once again for William's steady presence. She knew that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. The gentle goodbye they would eventually have to say was still months away, but already she could feel the weight of it settling over them both. The sound of Louis's laughter echoed from the garden below, bringing them both back to the present moment. Life was still happening all around them, full of joy and possibility. Catherine made a silent promise to herself that she would embrace every moment of it, no matter how difficult the days ahead might become. As the sun began to set over London, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Catherine and William prepared to begin the most important chapter of their lives together. It would be a chapter defined not by its length, but by the depth of love and grace they would bring to every page. 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing morning, and the royal family had settled into a new rhythm. Catherine had made the difficult decision to step back from most of her public duties, choosing instead to focus on precious family time. The official announcement spoke of a temporary reduction in her schedule due to ongoing health considerations, but those closest to the family understood the deeper truth. The children had taken the news with the remarkable resilience that often surprises adults. George, being the oldest, had asked the most questions, his young mind trying to understand concepts that even adults struggled with. Charlotte had simply hugged her mother tighter and declared that she would take extra special care of everyone. Little Louis, in his innocent 5-year-old way, had asked if being sick meant his mother couldn't read bedtime stories anymore. When Catherine assured him that she would read to him every night for as long as possible, he had seemed satisfied. William had rearranged his schedule dramatically, turning down several overseas engagements and reducing his daily appointments to spend maximum time at home. His private secretary had initially protested, worried about the long-term implications for his royal duties, but William had been firm. Nothing was more important than being present for his family during this time. The palace staff had rallied around the family with touching dedication. Mrs. Henderson had taken to preparing Catherine's favorite foods without being asked, knowing that her appetite had diminished with the progression of her illness. The security team had adjusted their routines to allow for more spontaneous family outings, understanding that normal schedules had become less important than making memories. On a crisp autumn morning, Catherine woke feeling stronger than she had in days. The treatment schedule allowed for good days and difficult ones, and she had learned to embrace the good days fully. She found William already awake beside her, reading briefing papers in the early morning light that filtered through their bedroom curtains. "Good morning," she whispered, reaching for his hand. William immediately set aside his papers and turned to face her. "Good morning, my love. How are you feeling today?" Catherine considered the question seriously, taking stock of her body and energy level. Better. Much better, actually. I think today might be a good day. William's face lit up with the kind of smile that had become more precious now that they couldn't take any day for granted. What would you like to do? Catherine had been thinking about this for several days. There were places she wanted to visit, experiences she wanted to share with the children, moments she wanted to create while she still felt well enough to fully participate. I want to take the children to the beach house, she said. Just us, for the weekend. No staff, no schedules, no official anything. Just family. The beach house in Norfolk had always been their refuge from royal life. It was where they had spent some of their happiest moments as a young family, building sandcastles with toddler George, teaching Charlotte to ride her bicycle, watching Louis take his first tentative steps into the ocean waves. It seemed the perfect place to create new memories. William didn't hesitate. I'll make the arrangements. We can leave this afternoon if you'd like. By early afternoon, their Range Rover was packed with weekend bags, favorite toys, and enough food for several days of family meals. The children were excited about the unexpected trip, chattering happily in the back seat about shell collecting and beach games. Catherine sat in the front passenger seat, her hand resting in William's as he drove, watching the familiar countryside roll past. The beach house welcomed them like an old friend. It was smaller and more modest than their other residences, which was exactly why they loved it. Here, they could simply be a family without the weight of duty and protocol that followed them everywhere else. The children immediately ran to their favorite rooms, rediscovering toys and books they had left behind during their last visit. That evening, they walked along the beach as the sun began to set. Louis rode on William's shoulders, pointing excitedly at seagulls and fishing boats in the distance. George and Charlotte ran ahead, collecting interesting shells and pieces of sea glass, their voices carrying on the wind as they called back to share their discoveries. Catherine walked slowly, savoring every sensation. The feel of sand beneath her feet, the salt air filling her lungs, the sound of her children's laughter mixing with the rhythm of the waves. These were the moments she wanted to remember, the simple, perfect moments that made life beautiful. "Mummy, look what I found." Charlotte came running back with a perfectly intact sand dollar, her eyes shining with excitement. "It's beautiful, darling," Catherine said, kneeling down to examine the treasure. "Do you know what they say about sand dollars?" Charlotte shook her head, waiting for the story she knew was coming. "They say that each sand dollar represents a wish that was cast into the sea," Catherine explained, brushing sand from the delicate shell. "And, when you find one, it means the sea is returning that wish to you." Charlotte held the sand dollar carefully, clearly taking the story seriously. "What should I wish for, Mummy?" Catherine felt her heart clench but kept her voice steady. "Wishes are very personal, sweetheart. But the best wishes are usually for the people we love to be happy." That night, after the children were asleep in their bunk beds, Catherine and William sat on the small deck overlooking the ocean. The stars were brilliant in the clear sky, unmarred by city lights. They wrapped themselves in a thick blanket and listened to the gentle sound of waves lapping at the shore. "I want them to remember times like this," Catherine said quietly. "Not the sad parts, but nights like tonight. The beach, the stars, all of us together." William pulled her closer, feeling the familiar ache in his chest that appeared whenever he thought about the future without her. "They will. We're giving them beautiful memories." "I worry about you," Catherine continued, her voice barely audible above the ocean sounds. "About how you'll manage everything after. I worry about Louis especially. He's so young." William was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. They had started having these conversations more frequently, planning for a future that felt impossible to imagine but necessary to discuss. "I won't pretend it will be easy," he said finally. "But I have an amazing example to follow. You've shown me what it means to face impossible situations with grace and strength. I'll try to honor that." Catherine turned to look at him, studying his profile in the starlight. "You're stronger than you know, William. You always have been. The children will need that strength, but remember they'll also need to see that it's okay to be sad sometimes."
grief is love with nowhere to go. They talked until late into the night, covering practical matters and emotional ones. They discussed how to help the children remember their mother, what traditions Catherine wanted to continue, and how William could maintain the balance between being a single parent and fulfilling his royal duties. These were conversations no couple should have to have, but they approached them with the same partnership that had carried them through everything else. The weekend passed too quickly, filled with beach walks, card games, and simple family meals around the small kitchen table. On Sunday morning, Catherine woke before dawn and slipped out to the beach alone. She wanted a few minutes to herself in this place that held so many happy memories. The sunrise over the ocean was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. Catherine sat on the sand and watched the light slowly spread across the water, thinking about all the sunrises she had witnessed and all the ones she would miss. When William found her there 20 minutes later, she was peaceful rather than sad. He sat beside her without speaking, and they watched the final moments of the sunrise together. "Thank you," Catherine said as they prepared to head back to London later that morning. "For what?" William asked, loading their bags into the car. "For understanding what I needed. For these 3 days of just being us." The drive back to London felt too short, even though it took over 2 hours. The children dozed in the back seat, tired from their beach adventures, while Catherine and William drove through the countryside in comfortable silence. Both knew they would return to the reality of medical appointments and difficult decisions, but they also carried with them the renewal that comes from time spent in a place of peace. As Kensington Palace came into view, Catherine felt grateful for the weekend they had shared and the many more family moments she hoped they would create together. Time was precious, but it was also still theirs to shape and fill with love. Winter had arrived early in London, bringing with it shorter days and a crisp chill that seemed to mirror the changing atmosphere within Kensington Palace. Catherine's condition had progressed more quickly than anyone had anticipated, and the good days were becoming increasingly precious and rare. Dr. Mitchell now visited the palace twice weekly, her medical bag a familiar sight to the household staff who had grown protective of their beloved princess. Despite the progression of her illness, Catherine remained determined to maintain as much normalcy as possible for the children. She still helped with homework when her energy allowed, still read bedtime stories every evening, and still insisted on family dinners whenever she felt well enough to join them. William marveled at her strength, watching as she poured every ounce of remaining energy into being present for their family. The palace had become a quieter place. Fewer official visitors came and went, and the usually bustling schedule of engagements had been reduced to only the most essential events. The staff moved with hushed efficiency, understanding without being told that this was a time for family, not ceremony. On a particularly gray December morning, Catherine made an unexpected request. She wanted to visit the places that had been most meaningful in their life together. Not grand palaces or state occasions, but the small, personal locations where their love story had unfolded. "I want to go back to St. Andrews," she told William over breakfast, her voice quiet but determined. "I want to see the place where we met." William looked up from his morning briefing papers, his heart clenching at the request. He understood immediately what she was asking for. This wasn't tourism or nostalgia, this was Catherine wanting to complete a circle, to revisit the beginning of their story as they approached what felt like an ending. "Are you sure you're up for the travel?" he asked gently, reaching across to take her hand. Her fingers felt fragile in his, like delicate bird bones that might break with too much pressure. Catherine nodded firmly. "I need to do this while I still can. I want to remember us there, where it all started." The trip to St. Andrews was arranged with the utmost discretion. A small security detail, minimal staff, and absolute privacy were the only requirements. The university had agreed to allow them access to their old halls of residence and the places they had spent so much time during their courtship. They traveled by car, Catherine resting against William's shoulder for much of the journey north. The children had remained in London with their nanny, though Catherine had struggled with that decision. She wanted them close, but she also knew this trip was something she needed to do alone with William. The Scottish countryside rolled past their windows, dormant fields and bare trees creating a landscape that matched the melancholy beauty of the season.
Catherine dozed fitfully during the drive, her medication making her drowsy but unable to achieve truly restful sleep. St. Andrews looked much the same as it had 25 years earlier when they had first arrived as nervous undergraduates. The ancient stone buildings stood unchanged against the winter sky, and the North Sea crashed against the nearby cliffs with the same relentless rhythm they remembered from their student days. Their first stop was St. Salvator's Hall, where they had both lived during their first year. The hall porter, now retired but specially called in for their visit, remembered them as the shy girl studying art history and the future king trying to live a normal student life. He led them through corridors that seemed smaller than memory suggested, past doors that had once hidden late-night study sessions and whispered conversations.
"Do you remember the fire alarm?"
William asked as they stood outside Catherine's old room, both smiling at the memory. Catherine laughed softly, the first real laugh William had heard from her in days. "How could I forget? 3 in the morning, and I came down in my pajamas and didn't have proper shoes on.
You gave me your jacket."
"That was the moment I knew," William said quietly.
"Knew what?"
"That I was falling in love with you. The way you looked in that ridiculous pink bathrobe, hopping from foot to foot because the ground was cold, and you were still smiling. Still making jokes to make everyone else feel better about being woken up." They visited the library where they had spent countless hours studying, often at the same table though they hadn't been dating yet. The art history department where Catherine had discovered her passion for Renaissance paintings. The playing fields where William had practiced rugby and Catherine had sometimes come to watch, pretending she was there to study outdoors. Their most important stop was Sally's Quad, the courtyard where William had finally worked up the courage to ask Catherine to dinner. It had taken him 3 months of careful friendship to reach that point, 3 months of walking together to lectures and sharing coffee in the student union. They stood in the exact spot, or as close as they could remember, where that conversation had taken place. The winter afternoon was growing dim, but neither wanted to leave quite yet. "I was so nervous," William remembered, his breath visible in the cold air. "I had been practicing what I would say for weeks." "I knew you were going to ask," Catherine admitted. "Sarah had seen you looking at me during lectures for weeks. We had a betting pool on when you would finally do it." William looked shocked. "You knew?" "Women always know," Catherine said with a mischievous smile that reminded him powerfully of the girl she had been. "But I waited because I could tell you needed to be the one to ask." They found a bench and sat together, wrapped in the warm coats and blankets they had brought for the journey. Catherine leaned against William's shoulder, looking out at the courtyard where so many young people had walked and talked and fallen in love over the centuries. "I've been so lucky," Catherine said quietly. "To have had all of this. To have had you, and our children, and this life we built together." William felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Catherine needed his strength now, not his sorrow. "We've been lucky together. All of it, every year, has been a gift." They stayed until the security team gently suggested it was time to return to their hotel. The winter darkness was falling, and Catherine's energy was clearly flagging. But she seemed peaceful in a way William hadn't seen for weeks, as if revisiting their beginning had brought her some kind of closure. That evening, in their hotel room overlooking the North Sea, Catherine asked William to help her with something she had been working on. She had been writing letters to the children, one for each of their birthdays until they turned 18, and one for their wedding days. The task was emotionally exhausting, but she was determined to leave them with words of love and guidance for the years when she wouldn't be there to provide them in person. William helped her organize the letters in a beautiful wooden box they had bought in the town that afternoon. Each envelope was marked with a name and date, written in Catherine's careful handwriting. There were letters for graduations, first heartbreaks, achievements, and disappointments. Letters that would carry a mother's love into a future she wouldn't see. "Will you make sure they get these at the right times?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I promise," William said, his own voice thick with emotion. "But, Catherine, you might be here for some of these occasions. Dr. Mitchell said there's still hope." Catherine smiled gently and placed her hand over his. "Hope is important, my love. But so is preparation. These letters aren't about giving up. They're about making sure our children always know how much I love them, no matter what happens." They spent their last evening in St. Andrews walking along the beach where they had taken so many romantic strolls as students. The winter wind was fierce, but Catherine insisted on going, bundled up in multiple layers and holding tightly to William's arm for support. The waves crashed against the shore with tremendous force, and the salt spray caught the lights from the town behind them. Catherine stopped walking and turned to face William, reaching up to touch his face with her gloved hands.
"Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "For letting me remember us as we were."
William kissed her forehead gently, tasting salt from the sea air.
"I'll always remember us as we were here.
Young and hopeful and so incredibly in love." The trip back to London the next day was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Catherine slept for most of the journey, her energy completely spent by their emotional pilgrimage. William watched the landscape pass by and thought about the full circle they had just completed, from the beginning of their love story back to this moment where they were learning to say goodbye. When they arrived back at Kensington Palace, the children rushed out to greet them, full of stories about their weekend adventures. Catherine summoned energy from somewhere deep within herself to listen to every detail, to hug each child, and to assure them that she had missed them terribly. That night, as she tucked Louis into bed, her youngest son looked at her with serious 5-year-old eyes.
"Mummy, are you very sick?" Catherine sat on the edge of his bed and smoothed his hair. "Yes, darling, I am quite sick."
"But that doesn't change how much I love you."
"Nothing could ever change that." Louis considered this for a moment. "Will you still love me even if you can't see me?"
Catherine felt her heart break and heal simultaneously.
"Oh, my sweet boy. I will love you forever and always, whether I can see you or not. Love doesn't disappear when people go away.
It stays right here." She placed her hand over his heart, and here, she placed her hand over her own heart.
Louis nodded solemnly, seeming to accept this explanation. "Then, I'll love you forever and always too."
After the children were asleep, Catherine and William sat in their private sitting room, sharing the comfortable silence that had become precious to them both. The trip to St. Andrews had given them both what they needed, a reminder of where they had started and confirmation of how far they had traveled together. Now they could face whatever came next, knowing they had honored both their beginning and their journey. Spring had arrived unusually early in London, bringing with it a burst of daffodils in Hyde Park and cherry blossoms that painted the palace gardens in delicate shades of pink and white. Catherine watched the transformation from her bedroom window, grateful to witness another season's rebirth even as she felt her own strength continuing to fade. The doctors had adjusted her medication again, trying to balance pain management with her desire to remain as alert as possible for her family. It had been nearly 8 months since that first devastating diagnosis, and Catherine had exceeded every prediction for survival. Dr. Mitchell attributed it partly to her positive attitude and partly to the exceptional care she was receiving, but, privately, Catherine knew it was pure determination that kept her going. She had promises to keep and memories still to make. The children had adapted to their new reality with the resilience that amazed the adults around them. George, now 11, had taken on the role of protective big brother with touching seriousness. He helped Charlotte and Louis with their homework and made sure they were ready for school each morning. Charlotte, meanwhile, had become Catherine's constant companion when she wasn't at school, reading to her mother and bringing her small gifts from the garden. Louis, now 6, still climbed into his parents' bed each morning for cuddles, accepting his mother's increasing frailty with the matter-of-fact acceptance that only young children possess. William had become a master at juggling his duties as a father, a husband, and a future king. His royal engagements had been reduced to the absolute minimum, and he rarely left the palace for more than a few hours at a time. The palace staff had rallied around the family with extraordinary devotion, taking care of countless small details so that William could focus entirely on Catherine and the children. On a particularly beautiful morning in late April, Catherine woke feeling clearer and stronger than she had in weeks. These moments of clarity had become precious gifts, arriving unexpectedly and demanding to be used wisely. She found William in the kitchen, making breakfast for the children before school. "Good morning," she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind. William turned in her embrace, immediately assessing her energy level with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to read every subtle change in her condition. Her eyes were bright, and her smile was genuine.
It was going to be a good day. Good morning, my love.
You look beautiful today.
Catherine laughed softly. You're biased. But I feel better today. Strong enough for something special. The children noticed immediately when their mother joined them for breakfast, a rare occurrence in recent weeks.
Louis insisted she sit next to him, while Charlotte served her orange juice with the formality of a royal butler. George, trying to appear grown-up but unable to hide his pleasure, told her about the football match he had coming up that afternoon.
I want to come watch, Catherine announced, surprising everyone. William looked concerned. Are you sure? It might be tiring, and the weather.
I'm sure, Catherine said firmly. I want to watch our son play football. I want to cheer from the sidelines like every other mother. So that afternoon found Catherine wrapped in warm blankets in a comfortable chair by the football pitch, watching George race across the field with determination and skill. She cheered when he made a good pass and groaned dramatically when he missed a shot, feeling wonderfully normal for the first time in months. William sat beside her, dividing his attention between the match and his wife. He memorized the sight of her face lit up with maternal pride, the way she clapped her hands when George's team scored, the pure joy in her expression as she watched their son do something he loved. After the match, George ran straight to his mother, sweaty and glowing with victory.
Did you see that goal, Mummy? Did you see it?
I saw every second of it, Catherine said, hugging him despite his protests about being dirty. I'm so proud of you, darling. That evening, Catherine asked the family to gather in the main sitting room. She had been planning this conversation for weeks, waiting for a day when she felt strong enough to have it properly. The children settled around her on the large sofa, sensing that this was something important. I want to talk to all of you about something, Catherine began, her voice gentle but clear. You know that I've been very sick, and that the doctors have been doing everything they can to help me feel better. The children nodded solemnly. They had lived with this reality for months and had adapted to it with remarkable maturity. Sometimes, even when doctors try their very best, people don't get better. And I want you to know that might happen with me. Catherine paused, watching their faces carefully. But I also want you to know that no matter what happens, nothing will change how much I love you or how proud I am to be your mother. Charlotte was the first to speak. Are you going to die, Mummy? Catherine took a deep breath. She had promised herself she would always be honest with them, even when the truth was difficult. I don't know exactly what will happen, sweetheart. But, yes, I might. And, if that happens, I want you to remember some very important things. She looked at each of her children in turn. George, you are going to be a wonderful king someday because you have a kind heart and you care about other people. But, first, you're going to be a wonderful young man. Charlotte, you are brave and funny and smart, and you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. And, Louis, my sweet boy, you bring joy wherever you go. All three of you make the world better just by being in it. Louis climbed into Catherine's lap, and she winced slightly but welcomed his warmth. If you can't see us, how will you know if we're being good? Catherine smiled, stroking his hair. Do you remember what I told you about love staying in our hearts? I'll always be able to feel how you're doing right here, she pointed to her chest. And, besides, Daddy will tell me everything when we see each other again someday. George, trying to be brave but, with tears threatening, asked, What should we do if we miss you too much? Oh, darling, Catherine said, reaching for his hand. Missing someone is just love with no place to go. When you miss me, I want you to do something kind for someone else. Help someone who needs it, or make someone laugh, or just be extra loving to the people around you. That way, the love you're feeling for me goes out into the world and makes it better. William watched this conversation with amazement and heartbreak. Even now, facing the most difficult conversation a parent could have with their children, Catherine was teaching them about love, kindness, and resilience. She was giving them tools they would need for the rest of their lives. The next few weeks passed in a blur of good days and difficult ones. Catherine's energy continued to fluctuate, but she used every good moment wisely. She recorded bedtime stories for the children, created photo albums with handwritten captions, and worked with William to plan traditions they could continue as a family. One evening in early May, as the palace gardens bloomed with late spring flowers, Catherine asked William to take her outside. They walked slowly to the rose garden, her arm linked through his for support. The roses weren't quite in bloom yet, but the garden was lush with green growth and promise. "I want to be remembered here," Catherine said quietly as they sat on their favorite bench. "Not in some formal portrait, but here, in this place where we've been happy." William understood. This garden had been their refuge throughout their marriage. They had celebrated anniversaries here, comforted each other through difficult times, and watched their children take their first steps on these paths. "I'll make sure it's always beautiful," William promised. "The children can come here when they want to feel close to you." Catherine leaned against his shoulder, feeling peaceful in a way she hadn't experienced for months. The pain medication was working well today, and the evening air was soft and warm. She could hear the distant sounds of London traffic, but here in the garden, they might as well have been in the countryside. "I'm not afraid," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the realization. William tightened his arm around her. "No? No. I'm sad about leaving you and the children, but I'm not afraid. We've had such a beautiful life together. I've been so loved, and I've gotten to love so deeply in return. How many people can say that?" They sat together as the sun set behind the palace walls, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. William thought about all the sunsets they had watched together, from their student days in Scotland to family vacations to quiet evenings just like this one. Each one had been a gift, though they hadn't always recognized it at the time. As the weeks passed, Catherine's condition continued to decline, but her spirit remained remarkably strong. She had good days when she could join the family for dinner or help with homework, and difficult days when she needed to rest. But, even on the hardest days, she found ways to connect with her children and husband. Dr. Mitchell began visiting daily, and hospice nurses joined the palace staff to provide round-the-clock care. The medical equipment was kept as unobtrusive as possible, but everyone knew what its presence meant. On a warm evening in late May, Catherine called William to her bedside. She had been sleeping more frequently, but tonight she was alert and peaceful. "I think it's time," she said simply. William felt his heart stop for a moment, then begin racing. "Are you sure?" Catherine nodded. "I can feel it. Will you bring the children?" The next hour was both heartbreaking and beautiful. George, Charlotte, and Louis climbed carefully onto the big bed, surrounding their mother with warmth and love. Catherine told them stories about when they were babies, reminded them of funny family moments, and made them promise to take care of each other and their father. "Remember," she said as her voice grew softer, "love doesn't end when someone goes away. It just changes form. Every time you're kind, every time you're brave, every time you help someone else, I'll be right there with you." As the night deepened, Catherine's breathing became shallower. William held her hand while the children slept curled around her, creating a circle of love in their final moments together. The palace was quiet except for the soft sound of breathing and the distant chiming of Big Ben marking the hours. Just before dawn, with her family surrounding her and the first light beginning to filter through the windows, Catherine took her last peaceful breath. William felt the exact moment her spirit left, though her body remained warm and peaceful in his arms. The children woke naturally as the sun rose, somehow sensing that something fundamental had changed. There were tears and quiet conversations, but there was also an extraordinary sense of peace. Catherine had faced her final moments with the same grace she had brought to everything else in her life. In the days that followed, as the world mourned the loss of a beloved princess, William and the children found comfort in the memories Catherine had helped them create. The letters she had written provided guidance and love for years to come. The traditions she had established continued to bring the family together. And, in the rose garden where she had loved to sit, a beautiful memorial bench was placed with a simple inscription, "Love doesn't end." The gentle goodbye Catherine had given them was not really an ending, but a transformation. Her love lived on in the kindness her children showed others, in the strength William found to continue his duties while being the father she knew he could be, and in the countless lives that had been touched by her grace and compassion. Catherine's legacy was not just in the official duties she had performed or the charities she had supported, though those were important too. Her greatest legacy was in the love she had shared so generously, the example she had set of facing life's greatest challenges with dignity and grace, and the reminder that even in the midst of profound loss, love finds a way to endure and grow. Years later, when visitors came to see the memorial garden, they often commented on the sense of peace that seemed to permeate the space. William would smile when he heard these comments, knowing that Catherine's gentle spirit had indeed found a way to remain close to the place and people she had loved most. The goodbye had been gentle, but the love was eternal.